Well, it happened again. Valve broke my custom game. It's 1 p.m. in Seattle on a Friday. Valve pushes some random nothing update. Most players don't even notice, but they just broke virtually every custom game. Almost immediately, I start getting pinged from multiple discords as players are unable to start games. I go to investigate, check the console, and get this incredible error message. Error in error handling. Error in error handling? At this point, I decide I don't want to look into this. The issue's widespread enough that I can count on someone else to investigate, and sure enough, a couple hours later, people discover the issue. For some reason, Valve has quietly, randomly, removed the ability to call the Lua debug library. Maybe there was a good reason for this. Maybe it was a security risk, or maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe they decided that since they weren't using it, it was fine to remove. We'll probably never know. Despite the fact that modders rely on Valve to keep our games running, there is zero communication between us. It is entirely possible that even now, they still haven't realized they broke anything. But this is the life of a custom game developer. Every few months, seemingly at random, there will be an update that breaks our games, and we have to scramble to fix them. Our games are built on top of a moving foundation, of which we have no control. And Valve doesn't seem to care. It hasn't always been like this. The reason custom games exist in the first place is because Valve noticed that modders were hacking Dota to make custom games and decided to throw us a bone. And this was no small effort. This was a headline change in Dota 2 Reborn, the biggest update in the game's history. And over the years, despite constantly breaking our games, Valve has looked out for the modding community, adding APIs, fixing bugs, and putting in work to support a community that does not actually make them any money. And they have, in the past, reached out to the modding community to ask what they could do to make our lives easier. But that hasn't happened in a long time. These days, we're lucky if they remember we exist at all. Let me walk you through what it's like to support a custom game. Every few months, there will be an update that breaks some or all of my games. Sometimes it's part of a major patch and I can at least anticipate it. Often, like this time, it happens at complete random. Sometimes what they've broken is so ubiquitous I can wait for someone else to find a solution. Sometimes it's so specific that I'm the only person affected. Sometimes it's as easy as adding a parameter to a function. Sometimes it's as hard as completely overhauling my entire game. The worst are the times when just testing a solution is time-consuming. Frequently, in order to test what's wrong, I have to launch the game, reproduce the issue, watch it crash, restart the game, rinse and repeat. And sometimes that's not even enough, because the problem only happens on dedicated servers. That was the case this time. So add on to that loop, upload the update, restart Dota, download the update, oh there's still a problem, close Dota, open the tools, over and over and over. Sometimes the problem is something I can fix, like it was today. Sometimes it's an issue with the game, and in order to get it fixed, I have to create steps to reproduce, remove as many external factors as possible, and report the bug directly to Valve in the hopes that they fix it. This is so painful. Not just because it's tedious, but because even though it's irrational, I feel responsible. I'm in charge of making sure these games work, and when they don't, I'm letting people down. And they'll let me know it. And so while I'm buried in this grind of fixing and testing and failing and fixing, I am so annoyed and upset and most of all, just tired. I think the worst bug I've ever had was on a game I hadn't released yet. I was working on building the map in Hammer for months when one day after an update it started crashing. Turns out there was an asset in the game which, when I pointed my camera at it, would crash the game. Like some sort of eldritch horror, just the act of observing it drove my computer to madness. That computer, by the way, was really bad, and the map I was working on was really big, meaning it took upwards of 15 minutes each time just to instantly crash again. And because I couldn't even see the thing that was causing the crash, I wasn't making any progress on finding the issue. At that point, there was a distinct possibility I'd have to throw the entire map away, losing months of work and maybe the entire project. I did eventually find a workaround with help from some friends. Basically, I was able to disable all of the entities in Hammer in a way that didn't cause a crash and re-enable them until I found the culprit. That's another common thing I have to do. There's some file or piece of code that's crashing the game. So how do you find it? By deleting as much as possible, then bringing it back bit by bit until it crashes, then repeating the process for the section you brought back. Because this is tedious, I put it off for as long as possible, trying to be clever and guess what the culprit is, but I've been doing this for long enough that I now know that it's probably just faster in the long run to brute force it from the start. Usually when Valve breaks something, it's a code change, but sometimes it's something more insidious, a gameplay change. In patch 7.07, Valve introduced status resistance and linked it to your strength. If you had high enough strength, you could get over 100% status resist and shrug off every debuff. They did not add a way to disable this. If you had a custom game where heroes have thousands of stats, suddenly those heroes had 100% status resist. This might have been manageable if we were given a way to offset this or change how much status resist you gain per strength, but we didn't. So, not knowing when or if Valve would ever give us the tools to fix this, some custom game developers decided to re-implement stats from scratch, which also meant completely overhauling the stats UI so that their stats weren't directly tied to Dota's. This was a major undertaking that they had to commit to quickly in order to get their games playable again. That's a very common way for custom game developers to think. The more tightly coupled your game is to Dota, the more likely it is to break when something changes. The most common version of this is trying to use a vanilla Dota ability in your game. Every patch, you run the risk of that ability being removed or reworked, so it's safer to just code the ability yourself from scratch. Ability Arena uses over 200 abilities. Every time there's a Dota update, I have to scan the patch notes to make sure they haven't changed any of the abilities that we're using. And if they have, I need to code the ability myself. Today, over half of the abilities are custom, and if I was more responsible, that number would be 100%. But the further you stray from using vanilla game mechanics, the more complicated your code becomes, and the harder it gets to fix things. That was the case this time. It turned out, while removing the debug library from most of my custom games was trivial, in Ability Arena it was not. The day after I uploaded my fix, I started getting reports that some modifiers were broken. It turned out, because we were using a library called TypeScript Lua, all of my calls to register modifiers were broken. They had been using the debug library to get the path to the file in order to register them. Now, I could have waited for someone else to come up with a fix, but my players were suffering, so I dedicated an evening to debugging this and finding a solution. Eventually, I came up with a script that manually maps all the modifiers to the respective files, but it still wasn't working. So I compared my output to the original output, and what I found disgusted me. Using the old method, the first time I get the file, it uses a /. The next time, it uses a \. So which one is correct? I tried both, and neither worked. The only thing that worked was using a / the first time and a \ the second. Now, I know that's not right. I know that can't possibly be true. I know it doesn't actually work that way, but that's the only way I was able to fix this. One last example. The thing that has caused me the most problems is Valve's ever-changing rules on pre-caching. Originally, you had to be sure to pre-cache every model or particle or your game would crash. Then, over the years, Valve added fallbacks that would show error visuals instead of immediately crashing. And they started to pre-cache things for you, to the point it wasn't clear when you did and did not have to do it. Because of this, I was able to avoid doing a lot of manual pre-caching, which greatly reduced my load times. And then one day, they reverted it. All of a sudden, I needed to go back to pre-caching everything myself. Okay, I can do that, but it was harder than I thought. For some Dota abilities, I needed to track down every particle they used individually and pre-cache them. Heroes need to have their cosmetics pre-cached for each player. That's not something I can feasibly do in a game like Ability Arena where every player can potentially play as every hero. Ultimately, I had to disable player cosmetics entirely. But I still needed to pre-cache the base cosmetics. Originally, I was going to do this by pre-caching the entire hero, but over the years, Valve has added so much extraneous stuff to heroes that trying to pre-cache all of them at once causes you to run out of memory. In order to fix this, I had to go through the painstaking process of manually defining the cosmetic IDs for each hero. And even after all that work, I still have tons of missing particles. And until I've tracked down each one, the game still crashes at random. I think. Because of the fallbacks, it doesn't always crash, which makes it even harder to track. And I don't even know if this is actually the issue. It's entirely possible the underlying problem is some other random change I don't even know about. It drives me crazy. At some point, you have to ask yourself, is this worth it? Some of my games have almost no players. The ones that do become less stable every year. And it's not like I'm getting paid for this. For most custom game developers, the answer is eventually no. The workshop is littered with custom games that broke years ago and have only accumulated more bugs since. There are so many games which, if they still worked, could have a second chance at life. So many beloved games, unique ideas, fun diversions just gone. The workshop is worse off without them. But I soldier on. I don't fix every game after every update, but I do try to get to them eventually. Because as dead as some of these games might be, there are still people out there that want to play them. Every couple months, I'll get a comment on a game I thought was dead from someone who needs me to fix it. and I will. The reason I made these games in the first place was so people would play them. And as long as they are, I'll do what I can to support them. So, yeah, Valve broke my custom game. And they'll do it again. But people still play them, so I'll keep fixing them. Until someday, I won't.